Hi everyone. In this video, we are going to talk about closures in JavaScript. And closure is a very important concept. So if you are new to JavaScript or if you want to brush up your knowledge on JavaScript closures, this video would be helpful to you. So let's get started. So if we have to write a simple counter in JavaScript, we would probably write like this. Let count equal to 0, and then we would create a function counter, and then this would increment the count and then return the count. And if I do console.log counter, it would return 1, and then if I run this again, it would return 2, and then 3, and then 4, and so on. So this is a simple counter, but one of the problem with this approach is that I can change the value of this count anywhere. So if I make this 7, it becomes 1, 8, and 9. So here we have created a function, but this variable, which is keeping track of the count, it's outside the scope of this function. So here, let me just write it down. Scope outside counter, but here this function returns the counter. Now, in order to fix this, we have to move this count inside this function. So let's move it. So if I do this, now the count is within the scope of this counter. But the problem here is that every time I invoke this counter function, it initializes the value to 0 and then return the value 1. And no matter how many times I run this, the value would be 1. So in order to fix this code, this counter function, we have to make sure that this count is initialized only once, and then we should have a way to increment it and return the incremented count. Okay, so this is what we have to do. Now, in order to do this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to initialize this count to 0, and then I am going to return a function. So this would return a function, and this function would return an incremented value of this count. So I'll do count, that's it, and then I'll just get rid of this. So now I'll remove this as well. So now we have created a function counter. In this function, we initialize the value of count to 0, and then we return another function, and this function increments the value of count and then return the count. So now if we try to invoke this function, we have to do it like this. So in const my counter equal to counter, and then if I try to invoke my counter, it's going to return 1, and then 2, 3, and 4. So here we have seen that this count, the variable count, is closed inside this counter function. Or we can say that this variable is private to this counter function. And this is what is known as closure. Now let's clean up this code a bit. So In order to increment it first and then return this count, I can simply write plus plus count. So this would increment the value first and then return me the incremented value of this count. Now let's look at line number 10. Here we are keeping a reference of this counter function. By reference, I mean whatever value or function we are returning from this counter function. So here, this counter function returns a function. So we are keeping a reference of this function inside this myCounter function, and from there, we are invoking this myCounter function. Now I can simply write this, and this would return me a myCounter function, and this myCounter would return 1, 2, 3, and 4. So this is another way of writing closed functions in JavaScript.